Hello, everyone, and welcome to Winded and Waiting. My name is Meagan Tenyer. I'm an adult with CF, and I'm joined by another adult with CF, Jason McDonald. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available to all after the event on the CF Foundation's YouTube channel. You'll be notified by email when the session recordings are available. Under the Stage tab on the right side of your screen, you'll notice the chat for everyone who is in this session. If you are in the Event tab chat, this is the full event and not specific to our session here. We'll be taking audience questions during this session. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time into the chat box. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. This panel discussion is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. Please do not make any changes to your own treatment plan without first consulting your care team. We have counselors on site, so if at any point you feel overwhelmed by the conversation, please visit the help desk to request to connect with the counselor. If you're having any technology problems during this session, please visit the help desk located in the expo booth area. All right, let's dive into this. I'd first like to introduce Jason, an adult with CF who has been on and off the transplant list multiple times in the past 20 years. Jason, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with advanced lung disease?
Sure thing. I am 48 years old and I live in North Carolina, and I've had advanced lung disease for pretty much my adult life, for most of it. I'd love to share a little bit about what my life has looked like through its various phases. So I was diagnosed really young at 2 years old and with double delta F508. And I have an older brother. He does not have CF, but he is a carrier. And I also have a cousin with CF. Um, so apart from, fistfuls of meds and nebulizers, I pretty much had a childhood more like an asthmatic. CF really wasn't limiting to me until I'd say my teen years. So I coughed a lot, and especially with exercise. At the time, the doctor's advice was don't do what makes you cough so much, especially because it could induce vomiting. I know that's changed a bit, and I discovered that on my own in my college years about kind of pushing limits to teach my body not to cough excessively with exercise. Back to high school, I really lucked out in that, I was told to pretty much avoid exercise for my health. But I stumbled upon surfing, and I surfed a lot growing up. And of course, that was a great method of airway clearance, but also it was, inhaling salt water, and that was before hypertonic saline was approved and discovered. So I had a great college experience. I had a big fear of needing to take a leave from college or not graduating at all because my lung function was marching down in those years. I was very active, didn't have a car throughout college, biked and walked everywhere. And I felt pretty fortunate that I did not have to have any tune-ups during college. Um, Moving on to professionally, post-college, I've had a couple of full-time careers in two different fields. And I had a kind of a life is short, let's do fun outdoor seasonal jobs for a couple of years in there as well between my careers. Yeah, I was a ski instructor, taught kayaking, did tours, was a wilderness guide, and my lung function was about 50% in those years, and I just kind of felt like got to fit it in while I can. It does seem like something really. It started affecting my ability to do things once I got below 50%. And so I did have my first tune-up or hospitalization at that point. I was probably 25 years old. And unfortunately, despite frequent tune-ups, which for me was every 3 or so months, it seemed, I was having a flare. My PFTs continued to drop. And once they got below 30, um, we started having the talk about transplant. Um, I guess going back a little bit, I was married in my late 20s. Soon after that, unfortunately, I required oxygen full time. Um, and I've been on and off that transplant list as much as I've been on and off oxygen 24/7. Currently, I just need oxygen with altitude, be it flights or visiting Colorado. My wife and I do have two kids. They're teenagers now, and by far, parenting has been the hardest job I've ever had. It is and has been extremely rewarding. When my second child was born, it just made more sense for me to focus on my health and my family and not run myself into the ground working full time. So I transitioned to part time. Um, I retired medically and took a leave for a while, sold my business, got approved for disability for insurance, and and that brings me to the most recent 5 years or so. My health has been lifted by modulators. So the first couple, not so much, but Trikafta was really a game changer for me. I was living with lung function around 20%, plus or minus a few percent, and Trikafta's bumped me up to around 30. And more important than that number on a page has been my quality of life. I've definitely noticed fewer exacerbations, and I'm able to do, a lot more of the stuff that I was missing before. I am able to mountain bike. I am able to go to the gym and, have hard workouts. I do use oxygen for those. I do ski or snowboard from time to time and crank up my oxygen. I'm really looking forward now to transitioning careers once again. I'm thinking of going back to school. And pursuing a master's in like counseling or social work, because again, these modulators have helped me set my sights a little farther out than I was for quite a while there. That's about me and my benchmarks. I'd like to reintroduce Meagan. She's had advanced lung disease for more than 10 years, and she recently received a double lung transplant. Meagan, can you tell us about your experience with advanced lung disease?
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Jason. I love your story of on and off for 20 years. It's actually quite amazing. So I'm Meagan Tenyer. I'm from the Metro Detroit area, and I'm 34 years old. I was diagnosed with CF at 8 years old. I had a pretty normal childhood, except for severe GI issues and a reoccurring rash with a high fever. My mom, who's a nurse, was a strong advocate for me and pushed my pediatricians in order to receive a diagnosis. We didn't know what that diagnosis would be, and obviously we had no idea it would be CF. She just knew something was wrong and she needed answers. After multiple doctors telling my mom that nothing was wrong and she knew that wasn't right. So she actually started going through her medical books and she found a photo of a rash that looked similar to mine. And one word under it said CCF. So that's kind of how this whole started. Was she brought her nursing books to the doctor to say, I think this is what she has. And of course, the doctor was like, no, 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 her lungs are fine. My mom pushed him. My mom pushed and pushed and pushed. And eventually he did. She pushed him hard enough to where he finally did agree to a sweat test. And that's how we got my diagnosis at 8. I had a very active childhood. I played all kinds of sports. I was involved in many extracurricular activities and volunteering. I didn't even get my first PICC line really until I was around 12 or 13. And I was fortunate that with my mom being a nurse, we were able to do IV antibiotics from home. So I never had to spend 2, 3, 4 weeks in the hospital, which was amazing, not only for just daily life, but also for your mental health, because being in the hospital is not fun. Once high school hit, I could tell that my CF was changing a little bit. I needed more PICC lines. I had more chest infections. I had a little more trouble breathing and coughing. And, my health just continued to decline really slowly. It was very slow, almost unnoticeable, but over the years, you could tell things were changing. In my early 20s is when my lung function started to dip below 40%. I've now had advanced lung disease for about over 11 years. But despite that, I pushed hard to finish my bachelor's degrees, and my master's degree while I was working full time. I only really used oxygen while sleeping and exercise. Otherwise, my body really compensated pretty well with having advanced lung disease. I met my husband when we were both 16 years old. He was always very interested in helping me with treatments and IV antibiotics and keeping me healthy. And it just wasn't an issue in our relationship. And luckily, he with having CF, we have to take pills with every meal. So he was totally okay with having a bottle of or multiple bottles of enzymes in his car and in our backpacks and everywhere around the house once we got older. But we had a pretty normal marriage. We Probably when we first met, I had about 80% lung function. We were teens. When we got married, it was around 40%. We got married in 2012, and we actually just celebrated our 11th year anniversary. We traveled as much as we could, rode our bikes, and were as active as my health allowed. And in 2020, actually during COVID, which kind of will be a year to remember, not for COVID, but for health issues, in 2020, I had what my doctor called my first near death experience. While sitting at home, we were literally just watching TV, and all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew that I couldn't breathe, and my pulse ox said 66. So I knew we were in trouble, and we had to get help fast. My husband luckily was able to call 911, and I actually lost consciousness before they arrived. But luckily, once I woke up in the ICU intubated, I found out that I had a tension pneumothorax, which is a severe type of collapsed lung, and I went into cardiac arrest and needed 3 minutes of CPR to be revived. And luckily, he was able to get me help fast. Luckily, he was home because I hate to think of what would have happened if he wasn't. Um, at that point, my doctors really wanted me to pursue transplant then. And my health, even with that near death experience, was relatively stable. So it really didn't change my PFT numbers. My exercise capability was still the same. So I made the choice to push it off and to say, no, not right now. I'll do some of like the easy tests like x-rays and CT scans and that kind of thing, but we're not going to do the whole transplant workup just yet. They supported my decision, even though I don't think they agreed, and we decided to wait. So at the end of 2022, I started coughing up blood, and every 3 days, the amount of blood doubled. So after multiple ER visits, they couldn't find out, well, obviously there was a bleed, but they didn't know why it kept recurring because I didn't have an infection, like I had no CF exacerbation symptoms, and it was just kind of a random event, but that kept occurring. So they did a procedure to stop the bleed. And then we had to have another talk of, okay, so now I think it's time for you to seriously consider transplant. And what my doctors explained to me was, you've had two near death experiences. We basically don't want to find out what happens if you have a third. And at that point, after all the blood and the massive hemoptysis, I was in full agreement that we needed to pursue something different because obviously, even though my PFTs were still similar, my oxygen use was still like my baseline. Like, obviously, my body was changing and my lungs were no longer agreeing with me. So we did decide to pursue transplant. And to say I was nervous for transplant was an understatement. Most of my career and my background is in patient education, so I knew where to look to find like transplant outcomes and real like case studies of people being transplanted and their outcomes. I knew how to find education and materials that would aid me kind of in making the right decision to move forward. I'm an extremely rational person, and every decision I make is really well thought out and researched. And even though I knew transplant wasn't a guarantee of success, and there's obviously 100 different things that can go wrong with the transplant, I knew that this was the best decision for me. And I decided to proceed. And I spent 31 days on the transplant list. And I received my call that they had the perfect match for me one early Sunday morning. And I recently actually just celebrated my 3-month anniversary with my new lungs. And I'm super excited to see kind of what our future holds because it looks completely different now. And it's really exciting. So that's enough about me, though. During our discussion, we came up with a few topics that we really wanted to touch on this evening. And the first one being our mental health experiences. Jason, can you tell us how your mental health was impacted by having advanced lung disease and being on and off the transplant list so many times?
Sure thing. Depression or not, I mean, being sick enough to get on the list for me took a level of acceptance and honestly a feeling of defeat. It's like I've done all I can do, and this is as good as it can possibly be. And I'm just ready for the life flight, quite literally. Now, then being delisted and having this happen, numerous times, takes an entirely different mindset to adapt and adjust. Okay, now I don't need to be rescued, what I had already kind of convinced myself to believe. And okay, now I got to switch to I can do what I need to do in life with these lungs. So for me, it just wasn't an easy switch back and forth. It took months at minimum, but more oftentimes years to get into that mindset. And as many people can relate, the quarterly appointments or the 6-month appointments, there's a lot that builds up to those. Have I changed? Have I not? Am I on oxygen now or not? And depression played into that for me for sure. And even with non-CF and non-advanced lung disease, I'm prone to depression. It runs in my family, and sometimes it's related to my health, and sometimes it's not. So what I've found to be helpful is for my mental health is actually doing stuff. They say we're not human doings, but we're human beings. But I just
Yeah.
question that one. I mean, I'm not going to stare at the wall or the ceiling and be happy. I need to be doing stuff. I need to be helping people. I need to be productive. And, in my adult life, I've more or less found that through working or raising a family. But, what about when I can't do those things that are best for my mental health? What about when I am in a phase of I just have to take care of me?
Mhm.
Um, I've found that therapy has been really helpful, talk therapy specifically. And I have no problem with going on medication to get my brain chemistry right. And I have had really good luck and success with exercise. That's not to say that, when I get sick or, get on the list that I'm not exercising and vice versa. I'm not always exercising, and sometimes I do great without a good exercise routine. But having a regular routine does help me for sure,
Mhm.
especially mentally.
Okay.
Um, and, it took some adaptation on my part. I used to do multi-week bicycle trips, and obviously can't do that anymore. And I can't jog, even cranking up the oxygen. I just cannot keep sats above 90 with jogging.
Yeah.
So for me, exercise these days is, e-biking, or yoga or walking, or sometimes talking, not walking and talking.
Yeah.
And for good mental health, I've realized I need to maintain good social connections. I'm a social person, and I like to be contributing to something. So I found a role at my last CF center on the patient advisory board, and at my current CF center, I've gotten involved, or I got involved. It's wrapped up now with a quality improvement initiative. So those are ways that have contributed to my mental well-being. So, Megan, I know your experience has been a bit different. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so I was kind of taught to be the glass half full type person. I was always compliant. My mother was a nurse, so compliant was just beaten into me, whether I wanted to or not. I had to be compliant 100% of the time. There were no exceptions, no excuses. Just do your stuff and move on. So there is a level of disappointment there that I tried so hard, and even as the years went on, it was becoming more obvious that transplant was still going to be in my future. And that was disappointing because I literally have done everything I could since day one. Being 8 years old, going through the teen years, going through college, and working full time, it was still always compliance. So I've never dealt with like anxiety or depression on a regular basis, But hearing the word transplant from my care team or my family would basically send me into a crying fit. Like the first 7 or 8 years, I just pretended like transplant didn't exist. Like I would just shut it down. Like just no, I'm okay. It's fine. We're good, and move on. I'd smile and move on. I was really good at that. And then it became obvious that I could not ignore it anymore, and that it was something kind of that I needed to deal with, and that I needed to see was going to be in my future. Um, and what actually helped me normalize transplant and even the word transplant is I also joined my CF Clinic's quality improvement project on transplant. And the whole point of the project was to bring the transplant topic, the conversation around transplant up to patients earlier before they need it. So it didn't come as a complete shell shock when they actually did. And we're still actually doing that project now. And I was actually really leery to join it because I thought, do I really want to talk about transplant every week when even the word transplant just triggers me? And I thought, well, if there's ever a time to join a quality improvement project, it is now when you can't stand the word transplant. And it's been 2 years, maybe even a little more than 2 years, we've been doing this project. And I am still talking about transplant every single week. And there's currently no end in sight. So it has completely been normalized even for me and my husband. It helped us both actually to normalize this topic in this conversation and kind of understand that it's not so scary. It's still terrifying, but at least it's something that you can come to terms with and do kind of what's best for you and your body. Um, so, Jason, I know our experiences also are different when it comes to employment and our medical disability, and I know you touched on that in the beginning. But do you want to share your experience and how you made that choice?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a lot of hesitation, if not guilt, about kind of throwing in the towel on working full time. I found it helpful to talk to the social worker at my CF center, specifically about disability considerations. He did a really good job of explaining the process, and he explained that most people are denied when they first apply, and these are kind of the reasons why. And I also learned that it's not necessarily once one is approved for disability, it's not necessarily an all or none proposition. There are these ways to still work part time, and you have to watch the tables of income and that sort of thing. So I was really concerned about losing that benefit of insurance. So what the social worker really helped me understand is there's applying for disability, and then there's living on disability, specifically the insurance portion of it. And applying for it, it was kind of black and white, and they just kind of asked, "Are you currently working or are you not?" So if I was working like 10 hours a week, they're probably going to stamp deny. So I was sure to take a period of not working so that when I applied, I could not be working. And I was approved first application, first try. There was a waiting period of, I don't remember, 18 months or something before the insurance benefits begin. But I found the Compass, CF legal hotline really helpful to bounce my questions off of in that process. Um, Years later, I really thought maybe I could work myself off of disability. And I consulted with the legal hotline again, and I got a dose of reality based on my lung function was still like 25% or something. But I just like had an issue again with like just, being on that and having that label. So I decided to stick it out and, see, okay, let's just see how my health does in another year, even though I'm feeling great and I'm doing more. But given that insurance benefit is such a huge one, it was better to play it conservative. So, moving on from, the once I applied and received medical disability, um, I made the transition into being able to be fully present with my kids and my family. And I was still able to work part time. And then, modulators for me just were like icing on the cake. And the tune ups are just that much fewer and far between now. So again, I'm looking forward to the future like I haven't in many years. So I know that you chose to pursue full-time work instead of disability, Megan. How about you tell us a little bit about your experience working full-time, all the way up until your transplant?
Yeah. So my parents treated me like a normal young adult, and didn't let CF kind of stop me or change my goals or my career path. So college and or a trade and or a career was an expectation in our household, and I personally chose to stay at home instead of going away to college. I'm more of a book reader than a social butterfly, so the college scene really didn't appeal to me. I'm also a germaphobe, so I knew that most of my need for IV antibiotics were related to me getting a cold or virus first, and I really didn't want to be any more sick than I already was. So I decided that staying local and staying around, obviously, just my family rather than thousands of college kids was more important to me. So I finished my master's degree while I was working full time, and I was still working even right up to my transplant. And um, it's working helps me feel it to be honest, working just helps me feel normal and it makes me feel productive. And so that was important for me to continue working for as long as I could. And like you said, Jason, you can only Netflix and chill so much. Like if you're not doing anything, you're just staring at the walls, like that's just not good for my mental health. I need the stimulation. I need to think. I need to feel productive. And for me, that was work. And I'm not saying that it was easy or that I would recommend it for everybody, but it was something that I wanted to pursue. I used to wake up at 5:30 a.m. every day when I worked in person before COVID, and to get all my treatments in, my exercise in before I even would start getting ready for work. So it was definitely taxing and definitely took a toll on my body, but it was what made me feel normal and what made me feel productive and what made me kind of felt like I was contributing to society. So that was basically how I chose to pursue work and continue to work full time. And to be honest, at the beginning, I was really scared. I was terrified to work full time. And I thought personally that I would fail miserably and that I wouldn't be able to do it. And it was a family member, it was my mom that said, worst case, you just quit. If it's horrible and you work for a month, maybe, 2 or 3, and you can't do it, you just quit. You just have to try it. And I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. Like, what does it hurt? So I would encourage you all, to still pursue your dreams, and it might be tough. It might be really tough, and you might be able to do it, or you might need to pull back a little bit, and that's okay too. It's all what feels good to you, what you're able to still contribute to your health and keep yourself healthy. And I know my doctor was in support of me working full time, and that was only because I could still do all of my treatments, still take all of my pills, still do my exercise. Um, because he told me personally, he said, if there's ever a time you cannot do these things, then you should look back at pulling hours. So, do what feels good. Obviously, listen to your care team, and you know, don't be afraid to go out in the world and try. Worst case, you change, and that's okay. So, Jason, I know you made the very important choice to become a stay-at-home dad. Can you tell us how you made that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the decision of whether or not we were going to have kids was a lot harder for me than, actually staying home once we did. Um, you know, uh, my wife and I were kind of traditional in the sense that, I just popped the question on her, total surprise. And we had never talked about marriage, never talked about kids. So when those discussions started coming up, we were in very different places. I was just like, I've got the realities of CF, the demands of treatments and on my life, like you, Megan. I was always very compliant, and when we started talking about having kids, I was on a transplant list. So I was just like, I think this is a no-brainer. This is crazy. But my wife was really interested in pursuing. It turns out, she had wonderful intuition because here we are 20 plus years later, and I still haven't had a transplant, and we have teenagers now. We arrived at the timeline that worked for us. And in terms of staying home, um, you know, like I mentioned, having kids at home, being at home with kids was like 150% full-time job for me, especially when they were, under 5. So, it's no coincidence that I did kind of throw in the towel, so to speak, on working full time once we had our second child. Um, you know, it was so my life is so precious and fragile and uncertain that I just felt like I want to spend as much time as I can with my kids. So yeah, that's what I did. So, I worked part time, but that really wasn't working. That was like an escape from work, to go work part time. So yeah, that's pretty much what I did in those early years, and then now they, don't need me so much. So that's why I'm thinking of going back to school and looking at doing other things. So you decided not to have children, Megan. Tell us how you came to that decision.
Yeah, so I've always loved kids and always expected that I would have children and be a stay-at-home mom. But with advanced lung disease, I didn't think that I could be kind of the mom and the parent that I always wanted to be. My sister has two young boys, and we will go over there and play with them, and it would just wear me out. I would leave so tired and so exhausted, and I just knew that I wouldn't be able to do it every single day. It would literally be impossible, or it would probably make me sick to do it. And like you said, Jason, it is 150% more than a full time job. It is intense. And we looked into adoption and fostering for many months, but this was pre transplant, and we just weren't in the right space for it health wise. My 1 year old nephew, he would know that if I asked for my oxygen, that he would go run, turn the machine on, and bring me the cord. So I know children can adapt like to their surroundings, but we just didn't think um, that I was well enough and had enough lung capacity and the ability to take care of a child or children all day. So we made the decision not to have children. And while that topic still might be open now post transplant, we're still pretty new and still kind of figuring out where we're at currently. So that's a topic for another time. But um, something else I wanted to touch on, Jason, is you've been off and on the list multiple times over the past 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you determined when it was the right time to be listed?
Sure. I guess the first thing I'll have to point out is I've learned that it's really a double opt-in system. Me as the patient need to feel ready and willing, and the medical team, of course, does too. So if it's like either one has veto power. If either one doesn't give the thumbs up, then it's a no-go. And I've experienced, all of those combinations. So the first time I met with the transplant team, um, I went into it with the attitude of, oh my goodness, I'm so ready. I'm on oxygen 24/7. I need to nap. I get tuned up all the time. Like, let's get on with it. And the doctor was just like, whoa, whoa, like, are you on BiPAP? Do you get winded when you walk across the room? Like, asked me all these questions that made me feel healthy. And, what he described was, you want a transplant when you need one, but you don't want to need one. So you really want to stave it off as long as possible. And, we've all heard it's not a cure, it's trading one condition for another. So, the longer I can stave it off, the better the procedure will get, the outcomes,
Yeah.
the immunosuppressant drugs, etc. So that was really a frame shift for me. Um, and the biggest factor that seemed to be that accelerate the conversation of when to get listed was being on oxygen 24/7. So, that happened when my wife and I lived in Colorado, and then we realized when I went down to sea level, I didn't need oxygen. So up, and we moved, which is not easy to do when you're in your 20s and you've got, a community of good friends. But if that bought us more time, that's why we did it. And then, the similar process happened when we were in California. It's like, okay, yay, I'm doing stuff, I'm surfing, I'm living, I'm playing ultimate frisbee with an oxygen backpack. And then there comes a time when I couldn't do that anymore. So it's like, okay, the doctor convinced me, Jason, I know you're going to pull out your spreadsheet, but I need to tell you from personal experience, you're in the window. Now is the time. So I reluctantly agreed and then continued to exercise and biking up hills with oxygen. And then over a period of weeks to months, I didn't need the oxygen anymore. I can bike up hills and not desat. It's like, I'm not going to trade this in. So I got delisted. So, that process repeated in multiple states at multiple centers. And, other times I was fully on board, and then the medical team said, whoa, we think you're bouncing back this time. So, I have to summarize the process of when do it's time to get listed or not, via the words of a surgeon at Columbia, who said, it's not a formula. It's kind of like falling in love. You can say ahead of time, oh, I know what it's going to look like to fall in love. But, the reality is you're in a relationship and all of a sudden you're looking in the rearview mirror like, whoa, I'm in love. Where'd that come from? So that's what it's been like for me. I've been in love with, the idea of transplanted lungs, 2, 3, 4 times, and I've fallen out of love. I'm still moving forward. So, I'll take it. So Megan, 3 months out, tell us what led you to being actively listed.
Sure. So before my transplant, I had been seeing the transplant team for around 10 years. And the reality is we were trying to find that sweet spot. Like you mentioned, when are you sick enough to have the transplant, but yet not too sick to where the outcome or the survival rate isn't optimal? So there's obviously no guarantees with any surgery, let alone one this big. And rejection is always in the back of your mind. And for me, it was I've already had 2 near-death experiences, and I didn't want to find out if I could survive a third, or if a third would put me in that category of too sick to either be listed or have a good outcome. So this was really my main driver in, okay, we need to do this, and I think we need to do it now. And it was really just a gut feeling. Like it was just my gut telling me I have to look into this, we have to pursue this, and to take that leap of faith. So that's kind of how we moved through that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So this process is so relatable.
yeah,
So thanks for sharing that. I'm in disbelief that you're just 3 months out. I mean, you just look fantastic, and you just don't look like you're recovering from anything. But such is the nature of CF and transplant, right? It can be invisible. So let's see. Um, is it time for questions, or did I miss a transition?
yep. I think it's time for questions.
Cool. So let's see. We've got a question that I'll read. Megan, what was your lung function when you got your transplant, and what is it now? And it's a multi-part question. I'll let you answer that, and then I'll ask the other ones.
Okay, so when I was transplanted, my lung function, I believe I had an FEV1 of 26, and it's now in the 80s. So 3 months out, I had my 3-month PFT, and it's I think 86 or 85, somewhere around there. So it is definitely a huge improvement. Like no oxygen, no treatments, no vest, no nothing. So it has been phenomenal.
Fantastic. And are you back to work?
Yes. So I worked remote during the pandemic, and I'm still working remote now. And I'm starting to go back to work. So I'm working just minimal hours, just kind of dipping my feet in the water, getting that brain going again and thinking again, because that's haven't had much of that the last couple months.
Yeah, yeah. So, personal question that you're welcome to waive if you wish, but do you think you'll revisit the thought of motherhood now that you've got new lungs?
So we have talked about it very briefly. Like I said, we're still really new at being post-transplant, and there's still a lot of doctors' offices, not offices, a lot of doctors' visits and infusions and bronchoscopies and everything else to make sure I'm healthy. So for now, we revisited it very briefly, very surface level, but we really have made no thoughts farther with my care team or with us. We're just we're putting that off for a little bit. So we're putting a pin in it for now.
Sure, sure. Cool. Another question is regarding caregivers. How are family and children affected by our CF diagnosis? I'll tackle that one first. So I could talk about my children and then we can broaden it. Again, I'm going to plug the social workers at our CF centers. My kids have both met with my social worker, and she was great in that she gave them some books that were written specific kids books. This is some time ago, written specifically for kids. They were comic books actually that dealt with sputum and treatments and all kinds of cool things. My kids loved my son, he's older, he loved reading them repeatedly on his own, and then my daughter wasn't reading yet, so, I read to her per her request repeatedly. So, how are they affected? They're affected like every day. I mean, I was just out playing volleyball with my daughter a couple hours ago, and every ball that she does not hit right to me, that I have to get, it's going to take me 10 to 20 seconds to catch my breath, so they live it. They know what my limitations are. And, my greater family, it doesn't affect them directly so much anymore. But, there's always fear and concern and the tricky thing that I've heard from family as well as friends is knowing when to ask personal questions like, how's your health? A lot of people shy away from that and they avoid it. And what I've told friends and family is it makes it more awkward when they don't ask. It makes me wonder if, they are aware of what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So with that, the communication has been more open. How about you, Megan?
So we had a pretty, so since I don't have children, we'll kind of talk about my husband and extended family. So I lived with both parents and an older sister. My older sister did not have CF, and she was like my personal watchdog. She would always tattle on me in school when I would, quote, look like crap and should go home. So she would be the one to call mom from school going, Megan looks really horrible. You or dad, have to come get her. So she was, I was the stubborn child who A, never wanted to admit I was sick, B, would push through anything. And my theory was if I don't give up, like it won't get me. So even when I was sick and coughing and felt horrible, I would never say anything. And so unless my mom like physically noticed I really looked terrible or sounded different or my coughing was more it was my sister who tattled on me. And like in high school they painted our school and I was very allergic to paint. I had an asthma component as well. And she's like, you need to go home. So she just like pushed me out of the front doors of the school. This was before schools had locked doors, and she would call mom or dad, so it was my personal cheerleader, personal security guard, and, everything else. And then my husband really has taken that over of, supporting me and being there for me and tell me when I'm being stupid and, and I needed to get help or I need to call the doctor. I need to get antibiotics. When you're kind of in the weeds, it's hard to sometimes see, the forest to the trees and you sometimes can't tell that you're getting sick and sometimes you need that third party to say like, hey, you're not doing so good, like you need to call someone. And
Yeah.
so that's just having someone else to do that for you and to kind of be my backup is super important, and it's made kind of our partnership even better kind of than I could have expected.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And another question for you, Megan. What's been the most surprising thing to you post-transplant? And maybe what didn't you expect?
So I think the most surprising thing was just being able to breathe so quickly. Like once they got the ventilator out, I was up walking the floors of the ICU, and immediately, like the day, maybe 2 days after surgery, I could breathe without oxygen. and my stats, like my oxygen saturation was 99. Like that's insane to me. Like I haven't had a 99 oxygen saturation probably in 15, 20 years, So to have that ability to breathe, even through the pain, even though your chest was just cracked open, to take a deep breath and to have just such easy, like flowing breath is an amazing feeling.
Hmm.
So I think that was the most surprising thing was that it was so fast, the change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think what didn't I expect? I honestly am really fortunate. I didn't have, knock on all the wood that's around me, I didn't have a lot of complications. So my recovery was, I don't say easy, I say uneventful. So I really had a uneventful recovery and healing. And like we started walking as soon as we got home, and I spent 9 days, I think, in the hospital total, which is amazing to me after a transplant, just in general. So it's just been amazing, and I've been soaking up and probably taking it way too much for granted, but it has been so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the phrase you mentioned, "You look like crap," reminds me of a little anecdote I have that ties into how did I know I was ready to be listed at one of those periods. And that was after being in the hospital for about a week, which is usually when I really started feeling better and started bouncing off the walls. I had a doctor come in, and she didn't even know me that well. So she was just like, "Hey, whatever. I don't have to worry about bedside manner." And I asked her a question about why my PFTs weren't coming back or why I couldn't exercise. And she looked at me and she said, "Jason, you look like crap." And the reality is, this is the stage of your lung disease.
Yeah,
And, you may consider getting listed now, you know, and it worked. I really appreciated her honest opinion
yeah,
because I have so many friends and family come
yeah,
visit me, or staff and CNAs and doctors
yeah.
and nurses, and everyone's just like, "Oh, you're going good.
I know.
Oh, wow." And they'll point out, I don't think they're lying, but they'll
Yeah,
point out the things that look good about me. "Oh, you have color in your face," or,
yes,
"Oh, it looks like you're putting on weight this hospital
yes.
stay," or whatever. But when I had fresh eyes on me and told me I looked like crap, it was just like, okay, like
Somebody's
maybe,
honest.
yeah, yeah, I really appreciated the honesty. Um, So here's a question that came in for me, and that is, how have I stayed off the list? And I guess the disclaimer I would say is, um, everyone has a different response to exercise.
Mhm,
Um, and I've responded really well to exercise.
mhm.
My most recent listing was at Duke, and they have a kick your butt approach of, they call it prehab, where you do, I don't remember if it's 20 or 30 hours a week. It's a part-time job for sure, and then
Yeah,
add in recovery and naps, it's a full-time job where you're just conditioning for transplant, conditioning. And that is something that got me on the list. You had to jump over that hoop to get on the list. But it also got me off because, I was in the window, but kind of
yeah,
barely, but then doing all this ridiculous amounts of exercise um, had me just healthy enough to not need it. So I've continued to do that. Again, the definition of exercise changes over time. Sometimes, like I said, it's walking my dog, but it's whatever it takes to get winded,
yeah,
and that's exercise. And I do stay pretty regular about exercise, so that helps for sure.
yeah,
And then the other piece for me has just been trying to stay on top of my mental health,
sure.
because it's just, I really sometimes when I'm feeling so down and low, just be like, "Save me, give me a transplant." Not that it would really save me
Right.
with my mental health, but hey, I'll take anything at some points.
Yes, right.
So
Yep. And I think there's one more question for you too, Jason, which I'll throw to you first. how would we want our caregiver to help support us during, or I guess, what's the best way for our caregiver to support us during pre-transplant phase?
Mm. Um, of course, I can only speak from my experience.
Hmm.
And, similar, you said your mom was a nurse.
Hmm.
My wife became a nurse while we were dating and got engaged. So I've had a nurse for all of our 21 years of marriage. And ironically, she doesn't do much of any of my CF care. Now and again, if I'm doing home IVs and the tubing needs to be switched in the middle of the night, she might do it just so I can get extra rest. But I like to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I like to keep my wife as my wife, not as my nurse. So, broadening that out to family and friends, sure, I do appreciate them checking in, um, and being compassionate, but I don't like when people make assumptions based on my lung function,
Yeah.
or what I may or may not be able to do. I'm fully capable of saying no. If they
Hmm.
say, "Hey, do you want to do this event or whatever?" But the most helpful thing for me has been treating me like a well person,
Hmm.
because that's the mindset that I need to have to stave off transplant. Could I be healthier? Of course, but I've got a lot going on that's good in my body and in my life, so I don't like to be treated as disabled on the regular.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a question that came up in another room that I have for you, Megan, and that is, in the CF world and in the world of those who are close to us who don't have CF, lung function comes up a lot. And some patients find it disempowering to talk about lung function because it tends to be such a low number for those of us with advanced lung disease. So, do you find it disempowering or empowering to kind of share your story about your lung function when people bring it up?
So I actually, that's a great question. I actually find it, I think, empowering, because I think it's amazing what the human body can basically accomplish, even despite having low lung function or
Yeah,
advanced lung disease. Um, like you, I worked out every morning, and while there are no marathons in my future pre-transplant, I still walked every day, or I still rode my bike every day. And as I got sicker, that transitioned to an e-bike, and my husband rides real bikes, and so I would ride with him and kind of be his pace car. So we would still exercise, an hour or two a day, and still could be together and still be outside and enjoy the gorgeous Michigan weather, but kind of do it my way. And I think it's more of an empowerment of how the body can overcome such low numbers and all these extra burdens of having oxygen and having, the mucus in our chest and everything, and still accomplish daily things. I like, similar to you, I also don't like to be treated as disabled. And for the most part, I like to do everything myself. And I would really only ask for help if I absolutely need it. Like, I'm 5'1", so sometimes that's getting something that's really heavy that I just physically can't lift, and let
sure.
alone it makes me short of breath to lift. So a lot of it, bless my husband, he used to do all of our laundry pre-transplant, because guess what? It was downstairs. So to carry a laundry basket upstairs with, 10 pounds of laundry or maybe more was kind of out of the question, because I'd be huffing and puffing my little lungs out at the top. So it was kind of taking our daily tasks and splitting them. Like, he'll bring the laundry up and I'll fold it. I'll put the dishes away. He'll put the heavy pot, that has water in the sink, or, something like that. So it was just, we worked really well to kind of divvy up those tasks to make kind of everyday work for us. So,
Cool, cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could take the opposite side of that, but I really resonate with what you shared.
Yeah.
And for me, I kind of feel like it's a badge that I wear.
Hmm.
And I play this little game when I get to know new people. of how much of me can they get to know before they learn that I have lung disease.
Mhm.
And, I'm not keeping any secrets. When it comes up, it comes up.
Yeah.
But, I really don't cough anymore.
Yeah.
So it's not until, oh, I join a volleyball team and they get to see how winded I am. So then it makes sense. But
Yes.
by that point, the friends that I'm on the volleyball team with, I may have gone out for drinks with,
Yeah.
we may have gone to, music concerts or whatever. And I just love that I look normal,
Yeah.
look healthy,
Yeah.
act healthy,
Mhm.
and then they find out, holy smokes, you've got like a quarter or a third of a lung when you're good.
Yeah.
Then I'm just like, yeah, yeah. Like for me, that's a moment of pride.
It is. I
Um,
agree.
yeah.
I agree.
So that's probably a good place to wrap.
Yep.
So for those who've joined us, thank you for your ear. Thanks for your questions and for your attention. And you've probably had a pop up about a poll. It is so easy. It's like a multiple choice question, satisfied, unsatisfied, etc. So please take a second to go do that. We'd love to know what was helpful or not helpful about today's conversation if there's an opportunity for feedback. So we're going to move into our closing message from our co-chairs, and we look forward to seeing many of you tomorrow for day 2, all about post-transplant life. Thank you, Meagan, for sharing your story and having such a fun conversation. And we'll see you tomorrow as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Well, we are back. This has been an awesome few hours. Hope everybody has enjoyed it. And thank you so much for joining us on this first day of Next Breath. Hope you all made many great connections and gained some new resources to support your health and well-being, and wherever you are in your CF, advanced lung disease, and transplant journey. We'd love to hear from you in the chat. Share with us some of your takeaways from this evening. Let us know what your moment of awesome is. I certainly, it's been great to just hear other people's perspectives and, share a lot about those similarities. Although we live obviously everybody has very different lives, but we all have those similar experiences where we can relate and to many things on. And Ashley, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that too.
I just wanted to give a shout out to all the speakers, facilitators, and other volunteers who helped make tonight a reality. We truly could not have done it without your support, so thank you so much. With that, I will say goodnight, and I will hope I see you all tomorrow. Thank you for attending Next Breath Day 1, and remember that tomorrow's event will be all about the post-transplant experience, and everyone is welcome.
And remember that the environment here is open. It's open until 10 p.m. So you all can, download some of the event resources, and there may be some things that you wanted to look at. Some of those for CF lung disease, pre-transplant, post-transplant, and some of the activities and workshops too. So are welcome to stay in here until 10. And this has been fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, and hope you all will tune in tomorrow as well.
Yeah, see you all tomorrow.